never let anything go, crash out completely and consistently, and you end up accomplishing your goals. Today I'm going to be talking about the most edgy 14-year-old I've ever read, and it's the only one that I've seen people talk about in terms of being like the edgiest fantasy series ever made, or it's in the conversation. Black Company's up there. The book's by Brian Lee Durfee. I think it's called The Forgotten Moon. That might be the first book in the trilogy, but those are both up there in competition for me, or at least The Forgotten Moon is. I haven't read The Black Company yet, but just considering The Prince of Thorns specifically, this one, it's an infamous fantasy book within the community, and it's like that for a good reason. If somebody tells me they don't want to read, or they couldn't read The Prince of Thorns, I think it's a pretty understandable take, mostly because it really is that edgy of a book. Jorg as a protagonist is such an unlikable character, not just because of his personality, but because of the actions that he does. Basically name any crime imaginable, and Jorg has done it at the age of 14, and he'll laugh and he'll brag about the things that he has done, the terrible things that he has done. And it does make for a very difficult read, especially if you're one of those people that really likes to connect with the main character and like the main character on a personal level. This is just not going to be that book. But to start off, in terms of like my thoughts on this book and why I actually think it's a great book, because despite every negative connotation that you can apply to the Broken Empire, or specifically the Prince of Thorns, this book is great. Jorg as a main character, I think, is absolutely fantastic. Despite all the things that he does, there is a really clear distinction made when it comes to Jorg's character that I really appreciate that Mark Lawrence does within this book. And it's really making a division between when a character is understandable, or their actions, you can kind of make sense of them in a way, and then a character in excusing their actions, because there's never an attempt to excuse the actions that Jorg does here. It's more or less just explaining the type of character that Jorg is and why trauma shaped him into becoming the character that he did. Trauma, among other things. There's some manipulation outside of Jorg's control that kind of guided him down a specific path, but just generally, trauma made Jorg into the character that he was, and it's the fact that he didn't ever get over that. He never let go of anything, and because of that, that made Jorg into this detestable individual, and I really love that aspect of the book. And that's mostly what I'm going to be talking about, because Jorg is the center figure of this book in every way possible. I don't really read too many first-person books. I think the only first-person series that I've read outside of The Broken Empire is the Percy Jackson series. So it's a very funny comparison to kind of make in your head. You have Percy, one of the most likable, relatable, young protagonist characters. Like, I remember reading him in middle school. And then you've got a character like Jorg, who is also very young, but in no way relatable, in no way excusable. And that's just a part of the, I don't want to say fun dynamic, but the dynamic that makes this book very interesting. But Jorg is not the only character, far from it. But I do think that there is a weaker cast when it comes to the characters that surround Jorg. Most of the brothers, I think, have an interesting dynamic or interesting quirks that go alongside Jorg, but they're not really much more than their quirks. This isn't like the First Law trilogy, where the characters that are also these deplorable people that kind of are in the same vein as a character like Logan Ninefingers. Those characters, they're all more than just their gimmicks, but their gimmicks are still very noticeable. Those characters are kind of here in this book as well, but to a much lesser extent, in my opinion. It all stems from just them not really getting the time to shine. I think that's the whole thing about first-person books, is that it's harder to explore side characters because you never get the perspective. And that's just something that you have to sacrifice for a book like this. And I don't really think it's the biggest deal because it still manages to create some absolutely fantastic side characters. That might be stretching it a bit, but some likable side characters for sure. I liked Mackin a lot. I liked the Nuban especially. The Nuban was, I think, the most refreshing character in this book, and his dynamic with Jorg was so unique compared to every other character in the book. Even a character like Mackin, Jorg just had this respect for the Nuban that you can really see why he liked him as much as he did. And so I think the side characters, while there is some room left to be desired, they're beyond serviceable, that's for sure. The world for this book is our world, but it's post-apocalyptic. It takes place, years and years after an apocalypse has probably destroyed humanity, probably something related to like a nuclear winter, and this is humanity going through another cycle of its life. And it was a weird choice. I'm not going to just blatantly say it was bad or anything like that, but it was a little bit off-putting once you start to get into a little section when it comes to Jorg talking with basically a robot, and that part of the story didn't really jive with me the best. I think that there was a way that could have been executed better, but just in general, the idea that this series is based in our world, in a post-apocalyptic version of our world, I like it, but like I said, the execution isn't there 100%. It really depends on how the other books expand upon it. I like some aspects of it where, these remnants of society past, like society in the past, where basically where we're at now, that does play a role in their timeline. I like that aspect to it, but specifically the conversation between Jorg and the robot that he talks to, I didn't necessarily like that portion of the story. But I really can't express how much I respect Mark Lawrence's, I don't want to say audacity or anything too exaggerative like that, but making us follow a character like Jorg, somebody as deplorable as, like I said before, unlikable as Jorg, I think is a genuine accomplishment, because I think he landed the landing 100%. Very much like perfect tens when it comes to specifically the character of Jorg at the end of this book. I thought it was a fantastic book, like I said. There are some times when I think Jorg does get a little bit out there in terms of his theatrics. It's a fun part of his character. It does sound a little bit weird to call any part of Jorg's character fun, but it did get a lot more interesting to read when he's basically dramatizing everything that he does. Sometimes it just goes so overboard that it does kind of throw you out of the story a bit, but whenever it's executed well, it is executed really well, and it makes Jorg seem like so much of a better character than, I don't want to say than he is, it just kind of, it shows him at the epitome that he is in this book, because he is a great character and he has some great moments, and that's probably the best way for me to describe it. Going back to just the accomplishment that I think Mark Lawrence was able to make with this book, with Jorg's character, you root for Jorg in a way. Of course, you're rooting for his downfall, of course, because with the stuff that he does, Jorg needs to go. Like, he cannot survive this trilogy and just be thriving at the end. If that happens, it would be a very unsatisfying book series. But at the same time, you want Jorg to get revenge. You want Jorg to accomplish the goals that he's set out for in this first book, because terrible things happened to him. Terrible things shaped him. And despite all the terrible things he's doing to other people, that just gets hammered in with this story, just how many times you go over what happened to Jorg and just how awful it was. It really does make you feel for him a little bit, obviously not a lot, because eventually once you start doing so many terrible things, you start to lose that sympathy. But there's still that other person out there that has done those terrible things to Jorg that needs to pay as well. It's very much, you want to see justice done full circle. Like, of course, this guy needs to go first, then eventually Jorg does need to go. And I really like that whole aspect to this story. But in terms of learning a lesson from a book, this one does really hammer home the lesson of never let anything go crash out completely and consistently, and you end up accomplishing your goals. Obviously, that's not the point of this book. It's if you don't let go of things, then it'll just take you down a path that is awful, it's terrible, but that is a fun way to kind of misrepresent and misunderstand the actual themes of this story. I just realized that I forgot to put the book up where you guys could see it. It's not that big of a deal, but yes, I loved The Prince of Thorns. I'm really excited to see what happens in King and Emperor of Thorns. I don't know what's going to happen. The only thing that I really know to root for is for Jorg to kind of downward spiral after Prince of Thorns. I'm not sure what else they could do when it comes to exploring his character in terms of just making him rootable, like you root for him, because the big thing that you're kind of rooting for kind of happens in this book. But I guess there are a couple of loose storylines when it comes to things that he could accomplish that would be satisfying. But yeah, Jorg, he needs to go down, and that's what I'm looking forward to.